Good morning. Thank you for coming. I think we can start. My name is Tom Gibson. I'm the Deputy Advocacy Director for the Committee to Protect Journalists. Welcome to this year's launch of the annual report for the Council of Europe Journalist Safety Platform. We publish the report every year. It provides a snapshot of the state of press freedom in the Council of Europe region. In 2025, we've seen a continued rise of authoritarianism in a number of Council of Europe member states in context of major backsliding of the rule of law, in which journalists are under attack as they've sought to work and report, including providing coverage of protests. In some countries, independent journalists face existential threats in context of financial instability, in part as a result of USAID cuts in funding and in climates where state capture of the media has become very significant. And also we see some governments seeking to criminalise the work of journalists through restrictive legislation. Efforts by the European Union, including the European Media Freedom Act, and by the Council of Europe, including its plans for a democracy pact, have been welcomed by the platform partners, but these efforts need to be supported by real political will. Some member states are responding, as noted in the report, to the measures facing journalists, but long-term support is needed, including funding. In this year's annual report, we note that on the one hand, some member states are seeking to protect journalists by setting up concrete national measures, including national action plans. However, on the other hand, other member states are deliberately seeking to silence critical journalism. So the annual report does serve as an opportunity for us to come together and collectively outline some of the important trends, cases and concerns. We've seen an ongoing rise of posted alerts, a quarter of which are on physical safety and integrity of journalists. We look at conflict and repression in some problematic countries, including Belarus, Georgia, Serbia, Russia, Turkey, and Ukraine's Russian-occupied territories. In Ukraine, the report covers the risks faced by those in the conflict, those journalists covering the conflict. And on occasions, what we've seen is fatalities of journalists. We also note the case of Victoria Roshchina, whose body was returned to Ukraine in February 2025 after being held in Russian detention and subject to torture. Around Europe, communities of journalists, including Russians, Belarusians and Azeris, continue to work in exile. We're going to hear today from Gunel, who's from Abzas Media, working in exile, an Azeri journalist. And we're going to also discuss the question of transnational repression. Around the Council of Europe region, scores of journalists are in prison. Continued impunity contributes to censorship in many contexts. And in the EU, we're going to be watching the potentially conclusive judicial proceedings in Malta and Slovakia this year regarding the murders of both Daphne Caruana Galizia and Jan Kuciak. A very quick overview of the platform. For those people that don't know it, it's a unique accountability mechanism. We're 15 partner organisations. We post what is called alerts on the platform. It's a public space. These alerts concern press freedom concerns that we see in Council of Europe member states. And member states have to respond in writing to our concerns. But we want them to respond with information that shows that they are seeking to provide remedy for the individuals concerned. In 2025, fewer than 1 in 3 alerts received a government response, and only 1 in 5 alerts since 2015 have been resolved. But together as platform partners, we continue to speak with a collective voice. Given the threats facing journalists around Europe, we need to be working together, and we do. Our work is around getting real action by governments and institutions to better protect journalists, and that's what we would like to discuss with you today. But we need to renew that message both with the Council of Europe and with the European Union. This press conference is going to consist of 2 panels. We're having a mix of platform partners and external speakers. We have journalists from Georgia, Azerbaijan, Hungary and Serbia who are going to talk about their work, their stories and the context in which they work. Halfway through we're going to be changing the panel. So I would like to firstly just introduce the external speakers. I'm going to ask platform partners to introduce themselves if you could. Gunel, SAFAROVA, if you could put up your hand, is the acting director and editor-in-chief of Abzas Media, an independent investigative media outlet from Azerbaijan, currently operating in exile. Abzas Media was the first target of the Azerbaijani government's crackdown on independent media that began in November 2023, with 6 of its journalists now imprisoned and serving sentences ranging from 7.5 to 9 years. Irma DIMITRADZE, if you could put your hand up, there we are, is a journalist and communications manager at Gazeti Batumelebi, an independent Georgian media organization co-founded in 2001 by Sakharov Prize laureate Nzia Amaglobeli. Previously an investigative reporter since 2025, she has advocated internationally for Georgian press freedom and for Nzia's release from prison. Nzia Amaglobeli is the country's first female journalist to be imprisoned since independence in 1991. This is our first panel. We're going to be looking at the question of safety, pressure and vulnerability of journalists. I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, Nick. If you could introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name's Nick Williams. I'm the Policy and Campaigns Officer at Index on Censorship. So first off, we'll hear all morning about how the threats to journalists has evolved, has developed and has entrenched, unfortunately, across the region. But unfortunately, one of the tragic consistent points is Russia's unlawful full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which has entered into its 5th year. So since the beginning of the invasion, 21 journalists and media workers have been killed. Tom has already mentioned Victoria, who Index were honoured to have published prior to her murder. But we have a lot of journalists who have been killed, predominantly obviously in Russian-controlled areas. However, that is not limited to that. And what we have seen is, as the conflict has evolved through the use of UAVs and drones, we're also seeing this as a new frontier of threats to journalists, the use of drone strikes and killing or injuring journalists. So, for example, 4 media workers, including a French photojournalist and 3 Ukrainian journalists, were killed in a drone strike. A crew with the German media company Welt were attacked by a drone in the Dnipropetrovsk region. And this is a really alarming development because it really blurs this idea of accountability and extends the reach of Russian threats to journalists in areas perhaps seen to be more secure than others. And obviously we've seen this evolve, not just targeting journalists, it's one of the dominant threats to everyone in Ukraine at the moment. And we are also seeing about 26 Ukrainian journalists remain in Russian captivity on spurious political charges related to terrorism, treason, sabotage, extremism. And this imprisonment and detention of journalists is not limited to Russia or Ukraine. In 2025, there were 65 new alerts related to detention of journalists across the region. By the end of 2025, 148 journalists were in detention. So obviously that includes people who were detained prior to 2025. I am going to give the numbers because I think it's important to be precise. We have 58 journalists in prison in Russia, which also includes the Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine, 36 in Azerbaijan, which we'll hear about in more detail, 27 in Belarus, I will say including a former colleague of mine, Andrei Alexandrov, 24 in Turkey, 2 in Armenia, and 1 in Georgia, as mentioned by Tom. Underpinning this detention is what I would call a creative abuse of the legal system, which has been paired with a erosion of the rule of law across the region. So we're seeing charges such as terrorism, extremism, national security, public order, petty hooliganism, disinformation, propaganda being used to target journalists. Most of these allow for wide discretion as to the arrest and sentencing or use of pretrial detention, and also has been deployed in contexts such as protests. This idea of petty hooliganism or disobeying police orders if you're documenting police violence at protests. While these laws allow for the detention of journalists, it also allows for the discrediting and smearing of journalists by equating them with criminals. And we need to be, again, very clear that this is not just an attempt to withdraw the journalists from the public space. It is a step to ensure that they're not to be trusted because they have a criminal sentence or are behind bars. Countries like Belarus, imprisonment and detention of journalists is the norm, not the exception. And we also need to be, as a community, very aware of the underlying politics around the political prisoner release programs that we have seen. And while many of those are to be welcome and many journalists have been released, this has not stopped them detaining new journalists. 5 alerts were published in 2025, including the detention of journalists in Belarus. And Russia, the repression is not just in Ukraine. They have been clamping down on all forms of independent journalism still left in the country. Again, using political charges such as discrediting the Russian army, spreading false information, inciting extremism, justifying terrorism, and disseminating terrorist propaganda. That last one is important because they are public interest journalists, but that is being presented as propaganda to justify the arrest. And Azerbaijan, I won't go into too much because Gunel is far more of an expert than I, but they've started using currency smuggling charges to predominantly focus on funding from Western donors to criminalize journalism. And this is what I mean by creative legal abuse, is states that have no independent judiciary, no independent legislature, are able to abuse, warp, manipulate laws on the books to target journalists. And we've seen this, unfortunately, across the continent, and there's not been a robust process by which these can be countered and opposed and changed. So too many people are remaining in prison, either in prison or pre-trial detention with no end in sight. So I think that gives a sort of, hopefully a continent-wide picture of the arrest, detention, sentencing of journalists. And as always, our solidarity goes out to every journalist who is unlawfully behind bars, and every journalist in Ukraine who's still fighting to ensure that Russian aggression is being held to account and being seen by the wider world. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Is it working?
I think so. Try it.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's working. Hi everyone, my name is Gunel SAFAROVA. I am acting director and editor-in-chief of Abzas Media. Abzas Media is an investigative independent media from Azerbaijan, which existed there since 2016, but had to become an exiled media in 2023 with the arrest of our colleagues. So this crackdown, when say in the last 20 years, Azerbaijan has 2 major crackdowns, which one happened in 2013 with the mostly arrest of civil society members and some journalists. But this time, the second crackdown, which started in November 20 of 2023, which is still ongoing after 2.5 years, I would say it's more major and continued with more arrests, especially focusing on independent media, which was has some offices and people working inside. So we have 6 colleagues from Abzas Media now imprisoned. They have their sentences June of 2025. They got from 7.5 to 9 years. 3 of them are women journalists from the age of 25 to 38. So by the end of 25, I can say we have more than 20, like according to Reporter Without Borders, they have said that we have 25 journalists, but we have also some media workers inside prisons too. As Nicolas said, they are charged with many like hooliganism or like many absurd charges, but mainly towards independent media like Abzas Media, Toplum TV and Meydan TV. It's mostly financial crimes, mostly currency smuggling or illegal entrepreneurship. These charges, and why our imprisoned colleague calls it absurd, because as Abzas media and other medias were doing investigations towards Ilham Aliyev and his close circle, the corruption scandals, and they were accusing these officials of the same crimes, but government turned the page and arrested all the journalists with the same charges, with the same crimes that they were accusing the government. So I would say it doesn't start in 2023. Actually, it started in 2022 with the new media law, which introduced a restricted stage registry system, demanding that all the media and journalists have to go to government registry, which was outrage of the independent journalists in Azerbaijan. All of the journalists, almost all of them who are now imprisoned, they protested openly outside of parliament. They were beaten, they were dragged, and they were said that their main words that we want to be an approved media. So after a couple of months, I would say, or maybe not even a year, this arrest started. And I would call 2025 actually the year that independent media is completely killed inside Azerbaijan. Now there is no media inside, there is media inside, but they are pro-government and state media, which ready to narrate whatever government tells them and do these smear campaigns against others, people in exile and etc. So currently, I would say there are still arrests, mostly questionings, threats, but many journalists who were linked to this media who are now not arrested, but they were questioned, they were threatened, they were put under travel bans, they were put under financial bans, the families of the arrested journalists and other civil society members. If spoken with numbers, we have now more than 360 political prisoners inside Azerbaijan. But I would say these 2 years, government tried to silence the journalists by arresting them or closing or raiding their offices. But the arrested journalists started writing from inside the prison, started reporting. And this ended with the retaliation against them, especially against 9 women journalists that we have. Azerbaijan is the 3rd worst woman jailer in the world. We have 9 women journalists inside. Our colleagues from Abzas Media, Sevinç Vagif Kızı, Nergiz Absalomova and Elnara Gasimova, they still continue doing their investigation or writing what is happening inside prison system, the corruption scandals inside the prison system, and the wardens, the officials working there. And as a retaliation, they were moved to 3 hours from Baku to remote Lankaran prison. And their families had to go like 6 hours every 2 weeks just to see them. And this is not even ending. Their family members are checked very absurdly, I would say. They are checking the inside of their shoes. They are checking even inside of the ring of their mothers. Just maybe they will smuggle some notes from there. And lastly, the recent story happened with Meydan TV women journalists. They were in the court, the ongoing court process. They are very vocal about it. They are calling out the absurd charges, and they are still writing and reporting from inside the detention center in Baku. Because of that, recently 20 wardens came to their rooms. They searched everything. They abused them. They threatened them. So, and even 2 women journalists, Aysel Umudova and Ulviye Ali, also arrested with a Meydan case. They faced sexual harassment towards them. So I would say the situation has not changed. It's getting worse. But one of the main reasons that it is getting worse, I think it's because Azerbaijan, as a member of Council of Europe, doesn't do its obligations. We have to work from exile for Azerbaijan with the threats itself, because the transnational repression continues. Now, Azerbaijan government started to arrest warrants or surveillance or even in absentia arrest towards exiled media members and civil society members. So some are charged with 6 years, some are charged with 16 years in absentia. So transnational repression is expanding. I would say this ongoing crackdown is not temporary. It's a structural transformation of the system. They want total control, and I think year by year they are reaching it. So, as I said, Azerbaijan is a member of Council of Europe since 2001, and it has its commitments, its obligations, but we don't see that it does it. And I think that whatever Azerbaijan does, not committing to its obligations, or even our president said that he will not accept the decisions of European Court. So this, I think, European decision makers have to make some choice, because either a membership in European institution carries a real standards or consequences, or those commitments shouldn't be like symbolic. We want from the European decision makers a systematic by the way, these words I am seeing our imprisoned journalists, what they want from Council of Europe. What we expect from European decision makers are systematic monitoring of trials and prison conditions, stronger use of Council of Europe mechanisms which judgments are not implemented, targeted consequences for officials responsible for torture and fabricated prosecutions, protection mechanism for exiled journalists facing transnational repression. So as I am saying, if Azerbaijan remains a member of Council of Europe, their membership must mean something, and the events of 2025 shows that situation is worsening, not improving, and this solidarity shouldn't be not in some events or in some tweets. I think it should be concrete. It should be much more bold. And if the commitments are ignored without consequence, it's not only Azerbaijan journalists who are disrespected or the people who are in prison are disrespected, but the whole European human rights framework itself is disrespected. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Julie Merzak. I'm the Reporters Without Borders representative to the EU institution. And I'm going to talk about risks to journalists reporting on protest and threat faced by women journalists. One way to measure the health of a democracy in a country is to start in the streets. And then ask one simple question. Can journalists report safely from those streets? Across the Council of Europe region, the answer in 2025 was too often no. Street protest on the war in Gaza, the climate crisis, corruption, contested election or attacks on the rule of law have too often become dangerous assignments for journalists. These are moments where independent reporting matters, and yet these were the moments where reporters were intimidated, beaten, harassed, detained, silenced. In 2025, alerts related to physical attacks on journalists during protests were recorded in at least a quarter of the countries covered by the platform. The highest level of these attacks were documented in Georgia, Serbia, and Turkey. In Turkey, after the government banned public gathering following the arrest of the Istanbul mayor and presidential candidate Imamoglu, at least 12 journalists were physically assaulted by police between 21st and 23rd of March. And then on 24th March, at least 11 journalists were detained during early morning raids on their home. In Georgia, journalists covering protests faced also repeated attacks by police throughout the year, access blocked, equipment damage. And in Serbia, journalists were attacked by police officers and the ruling party's supporters during protests that followed the fatal canopy collapse in the Novi Sad railway station. Several journalists were attacked despite clearly identifying themselves as press. And the risk became so serious that the Independent Journalists Union began distributing safety equipment for reporters covering domestic protest in an EU candidate country that should alarm us. Attacks linked to protest coverage are not limited to non-EU countries. Attacks were recorded in Belgium, Bulgaria, Croatia, Cyprus, France, Greece, and Romania. We're also seeing another trend, preventing international journalists from covering protests. Georgian authorities denied entry to an Italian journalist and a Swiss photo reporter, and Serbian authorities denied entry at the Serbian border to several journalists. Blocking access may be a quieter tactic than physical violence, but it serves the same purpose, preventing the public to see and understanding what is happening. Moreover, journalists who show solidarity with their colleague risk retaliation. In Georgia, the host of the main news program of the Georgian public broadcaster was suspended after and later dismissed after expressing solidarity with her jail colleague Mia Amagobleli, and after criticizing the lack of accountability for the police's excessive use of force against journalists. Similar threats have been documented in Serbia, as journalists were dismissed after showing their solidarity with protesters. The message is clear. Report and you risk violence. Speak out and you risk losing your job. Governments have a responsibility to ensure that journalists can report safely on protest. They must establish clear protection protocols. They must properly train police forces. They must conduct independent investigation into every attack, regardless of the perpetrator. And the Council of Europe must ensure that its standards are not just words, and that its recommendation on the protection of journalists is implemented, monitored, and enforced. Now let me turn quickly to another important issue, the situation of women journalists. Journalists are regularly targeted both online and offline, but women journalists face a combined risk. They are attacked on the basis of their professional activities, but also their gender. In 2025, for the first time, the annual report looked specifically at their situation. Women journalists are routinely subjected to threat of rape, misogynist abuse, stalking, death threat, and doxing. Such attacks may lead to self-censorship and push women out of the public sphere. It reduces the presence of women's voices in an already male-dominated media environment. The gender dimension has been recognized in several Council of Europe instruments, but recognition is not enough. It needs to be better addressed in the words of the Committee of Ministers. And we hope this dedicated part on women journalists of the annual report of the platform will encourage the development of long overdue safety and security measures for women journalists. Specific protocols for documenting abuse, effective restraining orders, support in dealing with complaint to digital platform, and systematic collection of gender disaggregated data. And let me conclude by saying that when cameras are broken, when reporters are silenced, it's not only journalists who lose, it is the public, it is our access to information, it is our right to know. Thank you.
Good morning. So I think when we speak about Georgia, it's quite good case study and quite a good example of how a country could go down on every sort of democratic institutions and democratic values very quickly. Because Georgia was somewhat flawed, but still democracy until quite recently. And our legislations were quite strongly defending press freedom and freedom of speech, and we enjoyed it. Georgian media became very vibrant, and we have great journalists, independent media outlets, and so on. But Russian invasion was mentioned, and it indeed changed a lot for us also. Since 2022, our ruling party chose, let's say, wrong side to side with, and it was the sharpest authoritarian turn that I've seen or I've read about, because I think in 2023 they introduced first time the foreign agent or Russian law, as we call it, because it was copy-pasted, and something not unique, because as we see, the authoritarians do use such kind of methods to attack the media and press freedom, and not only, but freedom itself, because it's impossible to actually get such kind of control and authoritarian rule and grab with having the media on the side and reporting freely. So in 2023, there was a push from the public. It was quite strong, and we achieved withdrawal of this law, and we naively celebrated it. Just after a year, we got this even worse law adopted, and that's when it started. We saw all sorts of assaults and attacks on media, and mostly the target were public interest media, target were independent online media outlets, critical media, and also I should mention and I highlight that public broadcaster, which was never fully objective, let's say so, got fully effectively captured in last 1.5 years, let's say so. And we saw the attacks, physical attacks, which were like beating to the point that it was just by a chance that people survived. Dozens of journalists were beaten. Their equipment were destroyed, and they were sent to hospitals. Some of them required the surgeries, and there was never any accountability for that. It was on live stream that journalists were attacked by the masked law enforcement officers, and there is no investigation against it or anything. Instead, we got more and more laws adopted, and it came like a storm. I to be honest, at this point, I'm losing count of it, and I don't think if there is any idea to count or even read those laws. Now, in a couple of weeks, we will have new package, which is fully insane because it's so broad. I think there is no country in the world that could be able to effectively implement that law. But those laws are designed to give the tool to the authoritarian rulers to pick on anyone they want and to silence them. And that's what we think that will happen. What happened last year, and we mentioned Zia quite a few times. Zia was arrested, but not only arrested on politically motivated and trumped-up charges, but also she was subjected to what I call inhuman treatment or improper treatment in the language of law. And it was exactly, it contained the gender-based assaults, and it was never investigated. She spent months and months in a pretrial detention, which was absolutely unjustified. And she went on a hunger strike. She lost her eyesight. Her health deteriorated in a way that there is no going back. Nothing is going to make up for it. But something that was the pretext of her arrest or making this case as an example, punishment example, and to create a chilling effect on journalists in the country, turned out to work quite differently, because her arrest and her case actually united all Georgian journalists, all these vibrant media landscape representatives. And that's, I think, the only reason that last year we managed to survive, that we are still working, that no media outlet has left for exile, even though funding is illegal, even though, receiving the foreign funding, and not only the grants, but soon it will be also personal, because we had just a precedent that one of the TV channels received the communication from Communications Commission that they are starting administrative proceedings, because when they had launched the crowdfunding campaign, one of the donators apparently was US citizens, and that was counted as a funding from, you know, a foreign power, what they call. So these are the things that we are facing, and how we manage to survive is just a solidarity. And also not only solidarity, but I think why Georgia has a chance to also be sort of end up being a positive case study is that there is a quite big support. You might not know about this democratic decline, or whatever they call in milder terms, or what I would call it, it was a landslide manner, has met with the daily protests. Over 450 days there are protests. And there is a quite big solidarity towards the journalists, even though country is quite, I mean, most of very high numbers of population live in poverty, and there are lots of crowdfunding campaigns. The journalists and independent media still get some support, and what I want you to imagine is that after all this crackdown, after arresting people just for standing on the pavement during the protest, after journalists being fined of thousands and thousands of Georgian laris for covering the protests, after having journalists sent to administrative detentions for covering the protests and standing in the street, this January on the 12th, which marked the 1 year of Mzia's arrest, we had one of the biggest march. And this march was not only the journalists, but also regular citizens who marched for her, who marched for freedom of speech and for the journalism. There is a support, but of course there is also propaganda which is working against, and there is a power which is working against all of it. And I think it's so much, when I was listening to Gulnoza, when you come to those panels and conferences and talk about and share your pain and share your struggle and try to explain, I sometimes get frustrated because I see from I'm not a politician, or I never learned the law, but I see that there are tools, there are possibilities for decision makers, for politicians, for everyone to really change this. And probably we must also demand these changes even louder. And I want to see such kind of solidarity that we have seen in Georgia among the journalists to become it even more global. Because it's not about Azerbaijan or Russia. You are listening and you will hear many other countries also. And you will see that this is a growing trend, and this can affect anyone if it is not stopped before getting to your doorsteps. So probably that would be my call today, because we don't know what will happen. For example, I want to say this because the legislation that I mentioned makes every sort of transaction from foreign citizen or foreign organization a grant which needs a pure permission from the government, which if it is not got, that you will be subjected to the charges which could lead up to 6 years imprisonment. And when I was coming here, the organizers asked me about, what should I do? Because obviously we barely get minimum amount of some salaries or something that we can live week to week, day to day, and I wouldn't have the funds to fund myself to go to conferences. And I was like, let's do it, because you can buy me tickets. I'm coming there to speak for freedom of speech, for journalism, and I decided to stop, being that cautious or whatever you can call it, because at this stage, I think it's a very critical moment. If we would step back, or if we would continue to, try to find the loopholes, they will find something else. There is no oxygen in Georgia anymore for journalists. Now I want to advocate for. I don't think that there is a realistic chance of, bringing Georgia back to EU integration path or the democracy and so on. But there are things that we can do. We can fight for getting some of the laws at least milder, or revoked, get some of the prisoners at least released, because Georgia now has more political prisoners per capita than Russia does. So I'm fighting for it because I don't want many of you here who represent the better countries to have to fight for it tomorrow in your countries. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ricardo Gutierrez. I'm the General Secretary of the European Federation of Journalists. Not easy to take the floor after such a strong statement, Irma. As you announced it, Tom, I will focus my speech on vulnerable journalists, and mainly on two types of threats that are, I think, underestimated by the general public. First, the growing precariousness of the profession, and second, it was mentioned several times, transnational repression, which targets mainly journalists in exile. So you know the motto, the IFJ motto: there can be no press freedom without decent working conditions for journalists. And nowadays, you know it as well, the fact is major American digital platforms have completely disrupted the journalism funding model. These platforms and artificial intelligence operators plunder journalistic content without any financial compensation for either publishers or journalists. And the result is an unprecedented wave of precariousness, which primarily affects freelance journalists. The Media Pluralism Monitor study shows that barely 1 in 5 European countries offers decent working conditions for journalists. In December, the European Economic and Social Committee adopted a damning report on the working conditions of journalists in Europe. And this report was voted on not only by representatives of trade unions and civil society, but also by the employers. This report calls on member states and the European Union to take strong measures, such as adopting a European directive on stress at work or stepping up the fight against bogus self-employment. In Europe, journalists are being dismissed for doing their job too well. This was the case for Italian journalist Gabriele Nunziati, who was dismissed for asking good questions to the European Commission about Gaza. It was also the case for journalists at the Swiss news agency Protest Info, who were investigating sexual abuse within the church. And then there are dismissals for economic reasons. In Switzerland, again, the public media announced in November that 900 jobs would be cut, mainly as a result of a reduction in license fees. That's the situation. Increasing pressure from employers and massive job losses. This is also the reality of our sector. Another category of journalists who are particularly vulnerable are journalists in exile. In Europe, these are mainly Russian and Belarusian journalists. They are not always supported by European governments. They are also the target, you know it, of transnational repression by the governments of their own countries. At least 76 Russian journalists are wanted or have been convicted in absentia on politically motivated charges. In 2025, we noted a sharp increase in arrests and convictions of Russian journalists, under the so-called fake news law. The crackdown also targets Russian media in exile, labeling them as foreign agents or terrorist organizations, and this further isolates them from their audience and their sources. In Belarus, the authorities have opened criminal proceedings against more than 60 journalists in exile, and at least 13 of them have been sentenced to prison terms in absentia. Azerbaijan engages in the same practices. The authorities have stepped up prosecutions in absentia against journalists and critical voices in exile. 12 journalists in exile have been targeted by legal proceedings or even criminal convictions with sentences up to 8 years in prisons. 8 years in prison. The main recommendation from the report, the Council of Europe Platform report, is that host countries, Western countries, must strongly strengthen the protection of journalists in exile. Western states must grant visas and full protection to journalists attempting to flee Russia, Belarus, or Azerbaijan. And I can tell you that this is far from being common practice.
Thank you very much. Well, we're going to move to questions now. Before we get some questions from the floor here, I just want to remind people online that there's a chat box. If you're watching on the YouTube function, you can go to the chat box. Please do put your questions there. Tell us who you are, what country you're from, or you're currently based in, or you're working from, and I'll receive them and I'll direct them to the panel. I'd like to also, Gunel and Irma, just thank the external speakers again. You know, as platform partners, we really want to salute the courage, the stamina. We want to acknowledge the stories that you've told so that policymakers in Brussels and Strasbourg not just get to read the report, but also to really get to understand the human side behind what's going on in terms of this backsliding. Now I'm going to open up the floor to questions. Again, I would invite speakers to give a very quick introduction, but try to keep your question short and also to direct it to people on the panel as well, if you can. Georgi.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I don't need unless it's necessary for the...
Hold on. For speakers, we need a raving mic. Thanks.
Okay, Tom. Maybe my question goes also to you. My name is Georgi Gotev. I'm the editor of EU Alive, and EU Alive focuses a lot on countries in the periphery of the European Union. In that sense, I would like to thank very much Irma and Gunel for sharing your very, I would say, painful experiences. Of course, this event is organized in the framework of the Council of Europe, but we are in Brussels, and that's also the capital of the European Union. So my question is, where is the European Union in all this? You mentioned, Tom, that the United States under Donald Trump has drastically cut its financing for media. What does the European Union do? I mean, we hear a lot about democracy shield, but that's a beautiful description of something that is not very clear. It's maybe pie in the sky. I mean, what's your take? And I would invite also Ricardo, Nicholas, everyone, Julie, to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If we could take a couple of questions from the floor, so that we can have a set of perhaps 3. Do we have another question from anyone? Okay, in which case we also have a question online, which I don't know who it's from, but I'll direct it in your direction. What do you expect European institutions to do in the case of Georgia? So if you have a little bit of time to think about that. Julie and Ricardo, I'm going to respect my position as moderator not to respond to Georgi's question. I perhaps can at the end, but Julie, let me hand over to you. What can the EU be doing better to protect press freedom?
Well, I think it's clear that the EU is not doing enough and is not, I think, at the at the level of the expectation we have. They're too afraid of losing these countries and that these countries drop on the Russia side. But I think that's an illusion to think that it will reduce this risk, which is already happening, by trying to accommodate Vučić and the political leaders in Georgia or in Serbia. So yes, I mean, we as NGOs, we have tried to send these messages to the EU institutions, and we will keep sending these messages, and more concretely when we advocate at RSF around the Democracy Shield and all these initiatives, we are each time trying to reinforce the financial support, even if it's very difficult with, you know, these foreign laws. So it's really difficult, and I'll be really happy to hear and yes, to hear your suggestion and try to echo them at the EU level.
Yes, maybe before giving you the floor, like Julia, I'm never satisfied with the EU initiatives regarding media freedom, but I would not blame the EU. If I compare the EU with member states, I think the EU is taking action in the right direction. They adopted in 2021 the recommendation on the safety of journalists. They adopted, which is a major step, the European Media Freedom Act with this. It's giving us power, you know, to now it will not solve everything, and I'm never satisfied by these initiatives. As you said, Julie, we expect more from them because the situation is very bad. But I would say that the real inactive power is at the national level. I see a lot of hypocrisy from member states, because all of them will, you know, claim that they are in favor of press freedom, the safety of journalists, but I don't see them taking real concrete initiatives. At least the Council of Europe, the European Union, are taking action.
The thing is that I think most important, the EU, and not only the EU, but we all have to realize and understand and put in action that today, as the assaults from authoritarian forces are getting stronger and very much targeted and very much, you know, smarter, we need to respond properly. And if you see that the press freedom is attacked everywhere, if you see that media and capturing media and turning them into propagandists and silencing the independent media is used for not only, you know, some fairy tale to making you believe some stories like I don't know, that there are Masons or something like that, but also for for justifying wars, for, you know, justifying invasions and so on. Therefore, it is security matter. Then on the democratic side, the countries, the EU, anyone who claims that they stand on the democratic side, they also need to realize that press freedom and media is a security matter. And when it is a security matter, you need to take it seriously. You need to have serious actions about it. I understand that there are some rules, that some countries can block some decisions and so on and so on. Rules are made by people, and therefore you can make the new rules if you see that you are stuck in somewhere. Because now we live in this world where, you know, we are losing. The democratic part of the world is losing one after another, country after another. So just very simple, concrete actions could be made. In case of Georgia, for example, what I can remember now is the recent sanctions from the UK, which is not part of the EU anymore, but how they sanctioned propagandist TV channels in Georgia, which are indeed producing and, you know, fueling Russian propaganda. And it was a quite strong attack, I mean, strong targeted action, and it sent a signal. There are the things that you can do. You know, I understand that there are some other things in the world also, that leaders have to shake hands with some people, but when you go and shake hands with someone because you have to, because of other things, then make this handshake in exchange of something for you as well. You know, I'm not here to teach the politicians their job, but maybe they need to learn not their job, but being a little bit more brave. Because if not, then we are losing everything. And also, it's not only about Georgia or Azerbaijan or other countries. In the EU countries as well, supporting media and realizing that it's a public interest thing, like all independent journalists are doing public interest journalism. And it is all part of the security matter. It's all part of what kind of tomorrow we will have. And if there will not be media, doesn't matter if it will be because they went bankrupt because of the giant tech and were not able to continue operating, or if it was the, you know, a government attack on them, or whatever it was. So we need some, you know, more holistic approach on that, but on time, for the God's sake. Like, we are here, and together with Mzia also, Andrei was awarded this year, which I was very grateful for, the European Parliament, because they give us the platform to speak. Andrei, who is imprisoned for over 4 years now, and he will continue to be imprisoned. He didn't see his son growing up and so on, and there are so many of them. And yeah, it's good, and we talk about their heroism, but heroism doesn't change only things if we don't act, if we don't get at least 1/4 of their bravery in action.
Aidan?
Hi, my name's Aidan White from the Ethical Journalism Network. Look, congratulations on the report. I think it's really important what's being said here. What worries me is that there is a need to build a coalition of forces in order to take the messages and the recommendations that are coming out from this panel and from this report to make it into a much wider movement. What concerns me is that I often see these really important initiatives and these important demands really, the press freedom groups do a fantastic amount of work. The journalist groups like the EFJ are very important, but we need to see the engagement of far more civil society groups and so on. There's a massive crisis for communications. There's a lack of trust publicly in not just media, but actually in public institutions and so on. You know, how do we take this from a rather niche debate and discussion and try to convert it into a far more important wholesale debate and campaign in which all corners of society are involved? And I think this is a massive challenge. I know I was involved in work trying to do this years and years ago. It remains the challenge today. What more can we do to build that? For instance, where are the employers? Where are other media players? It seems to me we need to expand the network, make sure we are involving all the stakeholders that really matter.
This is a very good question. Nick, I can see your hand up, but we're just going to see whether or not we have 1 or 2 questions before we wrap up this panel from the audience. Oliver.
Thanks very much. I'm Oliver Moneycurl, a former member of the panel, now freelance media consultant. I mean, quick question to Irma. You mentioned earlier about calling on European journalists, global journalists for more solidarity. What does that mean in practice to you? What really are you asking from us all?
I think I would like to direct Aidan's question, Nick, if you can answer that. And Gunel, I would also like you to respond equally to this question about solidarity, because I think we're talking both about Georgia in crisis, the journalists on the ground, but also I think a group of people that is often overlooked is the question of exiled journalists. So again, if you can talk perhaps around what you need in terms of solidarity. But firstly, Nick, this is a great question. What can we be doing better in terms of wider outreach?
Yeah, I'm also going to merge it to something Ricardo had mentioned earlier, back to the original point as well, is that when we're looking at, I'm from the UK, not involved, obviously not a member of the EU anymore. There is a huge problem with, right now we have an unprecedented number of journalists working in exile in Europe, and not just from other European countries. You know, we have people from Afghanistan, Iran, Rwanda, India, Russia, you know, in Europe, and they're not receiving the security that they need. You know, setting up newsrooms in exile is a time-intensive, costly process. And at the time now, like the UK is just talking about limiting refugee status for 30 months. That's not good enough to be able to set up and function to working in exile. And this is a role for every member state and every country across Europe to ensure that exile journalists are able to work. And I think there's always a big missing part of the conversation if we're not talking about exiles and people working in third countries in Europe. In terms of, I think there is a real problem with a lot of these initiatives sort of getting outside of this bubble. I've had a number of concerns with some of these initiatives, well-meaning, but they need to speak to, you know, to like media's readership, the wider community. There's some really good examples in the UK of media organisations working very closely with civil society, you know, sort of in terms of their investigation or their impact reach. We work on the UK Anti-SLAPP Coalition, and we work a lot with journalists, but also targets, community groups, women's groups, things like that. I think there needs to be a little bit more boldness in not seeing media freedom as this isolated technical issue, like how it bleeds into other forms of civic engagement. You know, there's the seeds of things, the Journalist Matter campaign, the Council of Europe doing a lot of really interesting things, but still very much speaking to the converted. It needs to look at how we can reach, as you say, employers, unions, audiences, communities where there may be like news deserts. We need to be able to address the real impact of media consolidation and capture. We're seeing that in real time in the US and the damage that's doing to trust in that. But also, yeah, media need to you know, really look at how to rebuild some of this trust, but also advocate for themselves in a manner that shows that their work is really at risk and everywhere. And this is not just in countries like Azerbaijan and Georgia that have maybe a more visible crisis point. This is also in countries that you would see as more established traditional democracies, like in the UK. We have a large problem in the UK with media freedom, but it's not seen to be at crisis point. But it doesn't need to reach that point before we try to address these concerns. And you know, the media need to be more engaged. We need to see media as part of the democratic structure. It's not outside of that. It is in that, and it's a vital part of that. And do more and be more ambitious and more creative and a little bit bolder, I think, within our community.
I think I will answer to your question in different way. It was again 20th of November of 2023 when the crackdown started. Our founder of Abzas Media, he was arrested, and then his deputy Mehmet Kekalov, he was arrested. And at the time, our editor-in-chief, Sevinç Vakıfkızı, she was outside the country attending some event, and she willingly, knowing that she will be arrested, she took that plane and came back. And at the same day, she was arrested at the airport. Her house has been searched, and now she is serving 9 years in prison. When we talk about, and after their arrest, actually Abzas Media, as they were investigative journalists, they asked other journalists around the world to continue their work. And I think in this case, and I have been head of the Abzas Media for last 9 months only, and I can see that we are getting more and more support from other journalists rather than European bodies or some government. governments. This year in January, so I think journalists do their best. I wish there will be more coverage about Azerbaijan. There will be more coverage about this, the stories of these journalists, these 25 people who has families, who has lives. I mean, it's their story has to be told, and we are telling their stories. But international journalists or like Reuters, like BBC, they have more audience, they have more reach, so it can help us in advocacy. But for example, this January 28, we did a campaign. Reporters Without Borders did a campaign on 800 days of Sevinç Belgit's arrest, as they are leading her campaign for 2 years now. And there were photos of all the other journalists, and there were a prison cell showcasing what conditions they have. And when they asked me, one of the reasons why they did this campaign is because Germany started buying gas from Azerbaijan. So it's some kind of, we are now, I'm talking about Azerbaijani people and journalists, we are became victims of gas and oil, because these European countries and governments, they don't want to openly talk bad about Azerbaijan because there is some gain. But in another page, we are losing as independent media, and people of Azerbaijan is losing because their voices are silenced.
Well, what I was talking about was I think last week I was talking to a colleague from Corrective, and we were talking about this also. It's a close call, and she said something like, we need a journalist NATO. And it was a sort of a semi-joke, let's say so, but I think we do need that. So journalists do have access to most important people in the world, to the decision makers. We meet them, we question them, and so on. But we still cover about our colleagues being imprisoned once some press freedom organizations release their reports or something big happens. And I don't think we as a community globally are united or realize that we are targets now, that it is when our colleagues anywhere are arrested or are imprisoned or are hanged or killed or whatever, that many different forms that take, right? It is also about us. So just envision what I would say, that we have this community sense, we have this sense that we are all in this together, that we talk about it, that we, whenever we have a chance, for example, interviewing Aliyev or something, just a side question ask about the journalist. My colleagues are arrested. Or, you know, when you are covering, when you have a huge website, have, let's say, one landing page about journalists being arrested. Like, remind people that your colleagues are being arrested daily, that they are in danger daily, that you might be the next. Like, communicate with our audiences. We have this huge power, and still we are not using for defending ourselves. That's what I mean. Like, because when Zia was arrested, for example, we had this we had some together, we had the live shows, like all the TV channels had at the same time, had some discussion. I understand that this is not possible, but there are ways that we could show that it is attack against us also, doesn't matter where we are, and that we remember our colleagues, that we remind everyone about them. Like, it's not possible that you always cover Georgia or Azerbaijan or even Belgium. I understand that, but it's beyond the borders. It's not just a country case. It's also about journalists. Just remind people every time you meet them, you communicate, like have some pages or have twice a year or something. That's what I mean. Again, I will repeat what Joanna said from Corrective, like have a journalist NATO, why not?
And on that note, and I just feel that we're actually slipping quite comfortably into a discussion here, which I would love to have with you, but we're going to have to move on to the second panel. Your words were all very inspirational. Thank you very much. I think there's a lot of things that we can discuss for the second panel, including political leadership, the solidarity, ways that we as press freedom community can also improve. Can we give a big hand? And then I invite the panelists to the second panel to come up. And we're going to move seamlessly into the second panel in order to avoid a break. The second panel is structural and legal threats to press freedom. As with the first panel, I'm going to introduce our outside external speakers. Dragana OBRADOVIĆ is the director of the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network in Serbia. Under her leadership, the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network has grown into the country's leading investigative newsroom. The organization has won numerous national and international journalism awards and is widely recognized for its professionalism and strong impact on its public agenda. And Dragana, if you could raise your hand. Also, if I could ask everyone, I know that we've had a break, but if I could ask everyone, we are now moving into the second session. Thanks. And Tamás BODOKY is a journalist and editor based in Budapest, Hungary. He is co-founder, editor and director of atlatszo.hu, a non-profit news site for investigative journalism since 2011. We're going to jump in immediately into the second panel, and I'm going to ask Flutura if you could introduce yourself and get the presentations going. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is working. My name is Flutura Kusari. I represent the European Center for Press and Media Freedom. I'll focus on criminalization of journalism through laws, on foreign agent laws, and also on SLAPs. This is the 7th or 8th report of the platform which we are issuing, and you will notice, if you compare it with previous reports, that we're paying quite a lot of attention to the legal aspects related to the work of journalists and media workers. And there is a simple reason for that. Legislation and judicial procedures, which are tools designed to protect people and ensure access to justice, are being abused by politicians and other powerful people across Europe to censor media. The report highlights how law is used to criminalize journalism through foreign agent laws, but also through other pieces of legislation where innovative provisions are contrabanded with the aim of using them against journalists. Abuse of laws and legal procedures has become the new weapon for bad actors across Europe to target journalists and civil society. And the question is, of course, why is that? It's because they are effective weapons. They're packaged as legitimate legal instruments, and countering them requires time, energy, expertise to fight back, but meanwhile they cause a lot of harm. Now, on foreign agent laws, all authoritarian politicians and those in power have one thing in common. They absolutely love to copy-paste each other's tactics to suppress media freedom. And sometimes I feel there is a competition between them who can copy faster. So what we know is that foreign agent laws started in Russia, and in a bit more than a decade, the governments of Hungary, Georgia, Slovakia, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina have either already introduced or are about to introduce similar laws. And that's a very dangerous trend. If this continues, media suppression will become normalized, and the biggest victims will be the public, who will be deprived of professional, independent news that serves the public interest. Now, we're told that these laws are to promote transparency in media fundings, but that's not the real reason. The reason is to attack and destroy media, journalists, and civil society actors. Labeling media as foreign agents stigmatizes them. It creates a negative image and makes them look as if they work for foreign interests against their own country. This undermines their credibility and worse, makes them legitimate targets for abuse, threats, and even attacks, which is my absolute main concern. That's why we need to act very, very quickly. We, the civil society, have a very clear task to document when such laws are introduced, and this is what we're doing. We must support journalists targeted by such laws with expertise and practical assistance, and advocate with national governments against such laws. But at the same time, as the fourth pillar of democracy, we can only document, expose, inform the public about what is happening. However, those in power, especially at international forums, cannot pretend that nothing is happening. And I feel with foreign agent laws, this is what they're doing. I believe it is crucial for the European Union, Council of Europe, and other international organizations to come together and at least initiate dialogue with civil society to find ways to respond more effectively to foreign agent laws. And if this does not happen, the damage done to media freedom across Europe will be very difficult to reverse. And foreign agent laws are not the only problematic laws. Other legislation has been documented by the platform that is being used with the aim of intimidating journalists. In Turkey, you can face up to 5 years in prison for sharing information considered false in relation to online data leaks. And who decides whether that is false or not is the government. In Russia, you can be fined for searching for content deemed extremist. Again, what qualifies as an extremist information, it depends from Russia. In Georgia, I don't have to tell much. We heard in details from Irma what is happening there. And then we have slaps. So we do know that slaps are a European problem. And in all our reports, we've documented specific cases of slaps in the entire continent. We also know that the EU and the Council of Europe responded with instruments. So now we have the member states who are obliged to react to these instruments by introducing national legislation. Member states have exactly 75 days left to transpose the EU directive on slaps, with the deadline set for 7th of May. According to the Anti-SLAP Monitor, an online tool run by ECPMF and CASE, at least 17 countries have started the transposition process, which is, of course, encouraging but not enough. And the question is, what does it take for European standards to be implemented properly? First and foremost, all instruments, the EU directive, the Commission recommendation, and the Council of Europe recommendation should be transposed simultaneously and treated as minimum standards. Secondly, it's very important for civil society to be included in meaningful way. And the trend currently is that governments hesitate or even refuse to include civil society while drafting legislation. And thirdly, the cooperation with the Council of Europe can be fruitful for a lot of member states because they can provide legal opinions on draft laws if requested by government or civil society to assess whether such draft laws align with European standards. And I would like to conclude with a very specific request to journalists, for those present here and also following. Our platform, the Council of Europe platform, is the biggest in Europe. It's the key place to look at the state of media freedom in Europe and the most important tool we have to hold government accountable. Although we are 15 partner organizations, we need the support of journalists if the platform is to have real impact. That's why I'm appealing to all journalists in Europe. Help us promote the platform amongst yourselves, amongst the public, amongst politicians. Help us by asking your governments to respond to our alerts and report when they fail to do so. And help us promote this report by writing about it and by sharing the report. Thank you.
Well, good morning, and first of all, thank you for being here. My name is Jamie Wiseman, and I'm the Senior Europe Advocacy Officer at the International Press Institute, a press freedom organization based in Vienna. As has been mentioned, this is the 10th year of the platform of the safety of journalists, and the 7th or the 8th report we've done. I would wager it's also the longest we've ever written, and I think that's because of the huge and growing number of threats that journalists are facing across the region. As we've already heard on the first panel, these are physical threats as well as economic pressures. As Flutura has outlined, there are many legal threats as well, but also digital. And so the issue I'm going to be looking at right now is spyware, which is a major chapter we address in the report. The key finding of our 2025 report is that press freedom across Europe faces serious threats, and in some countries direct attacks from both traditional surveillance methods and of course advanced spyware tools by both state and non-state actors. So when I think many people think about spyware in Europe, our minds immediately jump to Pegasus, to NSO Group. A lot of us will have read about this and the major scandal that we saw in 2021. But since then, NSO as a company has really fragmented. It's faced sanctions, lawsuits, legal pressures, although it is still operational. And in its place, we've seen a really vibrant international spyware for hire industry flourish in Europe, which sells its technology to state bodies such as law enforcement and intelligence services, ostensibly, of course, for addressing terrorism and serious national security threats. But in many cases, we've seen it end up being used to illegitimately surveil journalists. So it's less visible, but the key finding is that the development, the marketing, and the abuse of spyware tools in Europe is alive and well, under the surface, out of the headlines, where it wants to operate. So this is an issue we've been tracking on the platform for multiple years. We've documented dozens of spyware attacks, and in the 2025 report, we had 2 new countries to add to that list. So the first was in Serbia, where, according to Amnesty International Security Lab, 2 journalists from BIRN, Dragana's media outlet, were targeted with Pegasus using Viber messages. And these were Serbian language domains linked to NSO Group. So at the time, both journalists were investigating corruption and foreign investments. And luckily, they were quickly identified as suspicious links and the devices were not infected. But it was the 3rd documented instance in just 2 years of Serbian journalists being targeted with this technology. IPI, along with other media freedom partners in the room, were in Belgrade last year in April, and we spoke to numerous other journalists in Serbia who have been targeted, who have been confirmed to have been infected, but for different reasons they haven't chosen to go public. So we know this is an issue that's a lot more widespread than you can read about online. And considering that NSO sells its technology only to state agencies, as it says, and of course the domain was based in Serbia, there is strong evidence of state involvement in this case. And inside the EU, the other case in 2025 was Italy, where Francesco Cancellato, the editor-in-chief of Fan Page, and the head of the Naples office, Ciro Pellegrino, were both surveilled using graphite, another technology which is less advanced than Pegasus, but still very dangerous. I think a key trend and similarity we see in both of these cases is that neither has seen any accountability or justice for this violation of both domestic and European law in surveilling journalists. And this really mirrors a pattern we've seen elsewhere. In Hungary, as I'm sure Tamás may speak about, Pegasus was used to surveil 5, 6, 7 more journalists. And judicial investigations in Hungary also identified no wrongdoing, as it was apparently signed off by a prosecutor. For the numerous alerts we've submitted to the platform as well, in the responses that we get from states, these are often non-answers. So it's a very frustrating picture there. So the 3 quick key takeaways I would say on spyware to highlight in our report for this year is firstly the worrying gap between the legal norms and regulations on one hand and the actual practice on the other, with really questionable national security exemptions being a key part of the problem here. The second takeaway would be that state and non-state surveillance remains one of the most serious and I think one of the most opaque threats to press freedom in Europe. So it's one that's really hidden, and I think really we know only the tip of the iceberg about. And third is that even though the European Media Freedom Act is in force and explicitly prohibits spyware except in extreme cases, we're continuing to see the abuse of this technology in the EU. The European Parliament's PEGA committee, which produced its final report in 2023, really did an amazing job of putting a spotlight on this issue in Europe. But since then, frustratingly, none of the recommendations really have been taken up by member states. After this meeting, we're going to have to rush off at 12 to go to the European Parliament, where a number of our groups will speak at a new interest group formed by MEPs with the backing of civil society to probe this issue more. And I think we're going to also share the findings of this report there and to call very clearly for the PEGA recommendations to be implemented. But yeah, as I kind of outlined, this is a very frustrating picture, but I would just like to end with one positive note, and that was that last Thursday in Athens, in a courtroom, a court handed down a criminal conviction to 4 executives of a spyware company, Intellexa, for their role in the widespread surveillance of journalists and political and even military actors. Among them was a Greek journalist, Thanasis Koukakis, who covered finance and banking issues. So this is the first time, according to our monitoring, anywhere in the world that executives of a commercial spyware company have faced charges and, importantly, convictions for their role in providing and selling and using technology that was used to surveil a journalist. So it's a major breakthrough, I think, for accountability for these kind of crimes, and should hopefully lead to additional and kind of increased pushes for justice and accountability in Hungary, in Serbia, and in other countries around Europe. But I think it shows the importance of having robust rule of law systems as well. I'll end there on surveillance. Media capture is another topic we look at. It's been discussed on the previous panel. I won't go into too much detail here, but it's really one of the more difficult themes to monitor, really, to produce alerts about. But it's one we really wanted to put into the report, and one we continuously highlight in our advocacy. In the report, we have a spectrum of countries, with the most extreme, of course, being in Russia, in Belarus, in Azerbaijan, in Georgia, where capture of public media, consolidation of private media, capture of the system for media regulation, and the capture of the system for funding media through advertising have all been completely entrenched. Elsewhere, in more kind of hybrid regimes such as Serbia, in the last year we've seen the instrumentalization of already tight state control over the media ecosystem to dampen criticism of and reporting on the protests. And even inside the EU, in the last 15 years, Hungary has established the most advanced model of media capture ever designed in the European Union. Which, as we see in April, we have a major window to see if that can change. Of course, we have the European Media Freedom Act, specifically designed to give new tools to states to help address media capture. And so far, we've seen the picture I think you might expect. So in countries like Finland, implementation is done, laws are aligned, it's completed. In other countries like Bulgaria, we've seen working groups established to only be disrupted, delayed because of different political reasons. And then there's kind of a group in the middle, like Greece, where they have passed, just in December, a new law implementing EMFA, but it's partial and incomplete. And then again, sorry Hungary, but on the other end of the spectrum, you have Hungary, which is challenging EMFA before the European Court of Justice. So it's a very mixed and patchy picture for media capture and the attempts to rein it in. So it's another key thing we're looking at in the report, and I will end there for now. Thank you.
Okay, so as Jamie already mentioned that Hungary is a black sheep in the EU regarding press freedom. But in the last 2 years, I'm afraid that we are started to go down the Georgian way, the Russian way, with new legislation I will talk about. But to sum up the situation in Hungary, the government is in power since 16 years now. From year one, they started to occupy media, to buy media, to consolidate media into a pro-government system. So the mainstream media system is totally captured. The public service media acts as the party media for the governing party, and there is a shrinking space for independent outlets who are still critical of the government. And the government, fortunately, there is no violence, so we are not beaten and we are not thrown to jail. The government is using economic and legal methods to restrict press freedom in Hungary. And the economic method is to basically pour taxpayers' money into this waste pro-government propaganda machine, which is free to all and in push mode reaches all the citizens, while the independent media outlets are struggling to financially. And this struggle led to independent media to some of the outlets to seek foreign funding for an extent. And when the government realized that although they turned off all the taps and independent media should be starving and they are still alive, they went after foreign funding. So now, for 10 years now, there have been smear campaigns and propaganda attacks on independent media receiving foreign funding, including my outlet, that we are unpatriotic, we are working against the country, we represent foreign interests, even treason is mentioned. So in the last 2 years, a pro-government NGO held like 3 press conferences about specifically my outlet, and they urged the Secret Service to intervene because this outlet is receiving foreign funding and that this should be investigated. Up until 2024, these smear campaigns and propaganda attacks did not result in anything, any official action. No authorities followed up on these claims, and basically nothing happened. It was all about discrediting the investigative work we were doing. But in 24, the Hungarian state decided to establish a new authority with a new law, the Sovereignty Protection Act, and they established the Sovereignty Protection Office, which is a state office, so not a pro-government NGO or not a media anymore, but it's a state office, so it's the next level of harassment. And this state office's sole purpose is to go after NGOs and independent media based on real or not real foreign funding. And one of the first targets of this new authority was my outlet, atlatszo.hu. Atlatszo means transparent in Hungarian. This is a very unfortunate name in international context because no one can pronounce it except Hungarians, but it means transparent, and it means that we combine investigative journalism with freedom of information requests and freedom of information litigation to get information on public interest topics. And one of these public interest topics is the environmental pollution of Far Eastern battery factories, which are now settling in Hungary because the government's idea is to make Hungary some kind of electric car superpower or battery manufacturing superpower. So we have a lot of Far Eastern battery factories starting up in the country, and we have been investigating them, and we found some problems with environmental pollution. This will lead to an interesting plot twist, but first I explain what the Sovereignty Protection Office did to us. They investigated us, and they said that in 24, and they said that atlatszo is hurting Hungarian sovereignty. It is spying on behalf of foreign powers. It's spreading disinformation. It's laundering money. So basically, huge crimes were involved in this report. And we thought, okay, now we are done. The police will come tomorrow. But nothing happened, so we sued this Sovereignty Protection Office that these claims are unfounded, and we want them to prove them in court. And they could not prove it, so we last year we won a personal rights lawsuit against the Sovereignty Protection on first instance. Obviously, they appealed, so the trial is not, the verdict is not final yet. But the most interesting thing what happened, and also in last year, the government decided that based on these so-called investigations by the Sovereignty Protection Office, they will introduce a law, so-called transparency law, which will allow the Sovereignty Protection Office to blacklist organizations. And if the Sovereignty Protection Office finds an independent media organization or an NGO harmful to Hungarian sovereignty, they can blacklist this organization, and this will lead automatically to ban of foreign funding and also ban of domestic tax donations, which is basically will kill the business model of these organizations. Fortunately, this law was not voted on. It was supposed to be voted on last June, and it was postponed. But in this year's election campaign, our Prime Minister again promised that they will finish the cleanup after the election in case they can win this election. So they will vote in this law, and they will get rid of foreign financed traitors. So, and the plot twist I was mentioning is that the latest news is that the independent news site atlatszo.hu found evidence that one of these Far Eastern battery factories, the Samsung SDI battery factory, lobbied the government before the SPO started the investigations against the atlatszo. So they lobbied the battery factory lobbied the government to ban atlatszo, and then the SPO started to investigate atlatszo. So ironically, this is a very Eastern European thing that we have been condemned and ruled harmful to Hungarian sovereignty to please a Far Eastern multinational company who was annoyed by our reporting. Thanks.
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Dragana OBRADOVIĆ, and I'm coming from BIRN. As Tom said at the beginning, it is investigative outlet with many awards, but it is also an investigative outlet that only last year had spyware attacks, physical attacks against its journalists, targeted online campaigns, 5 lawsuits, smear campaigns happening every day. But I'm not here today only to speak about what's going on in my newsroom. It is just one paradigmatic example of basically what is happening with Serbian independent media in general, and to call for close monitoring because actually after the first panel that we had with colleagues from Azerbaijan and Georgia, honestly, like I recognize features of these systems being created in the Serbia at the moment. Like it all sounds very familiar, speaking about the labeling journalists as terrorists, as organized crime group members, propaganda instigators, also talking about masked law enforcement. I'm reading because I was writing notes of what colleagues were saying. Broken cameras, journalists being beaten, it all sounds very familiar for what we're facing in Serbia at the moment. And I think it's probably important to tell to the colleagues that are not following so closely maybe political developments in Serbia, that this is all happening in a backdrop of protests that are lasting for a year and a half at the moment in the country, which started as a student-led protest and raised into, I would say, like a public movement that goes beyond that, because today only, if you look news in Serbia, you will see that there is a protest of farmer, that you have farmers detained for protesting. Then you also have a protest in support of detained farmers, that you have a student list reporting being intimidated and pressured in the preparation of the local elections. And also accounts of teachers losing their job because they supported their students. So it is only from today's news that I browsed like quickly on our way here. So I would say we are not anymore speaking in Serbia about like democratic backsliding. We are talking now about institutionalization of repression, and we are seeing it at every step. So I will just, because Serbia is mentioned literally in every chapter, it seems to me, of the report that I quickly looked. I will just use a couple of snapshots maybe to explain how the situation is going from bad to worst, honestly. So speaking about the physical attacks in 2025, 371 case of threat and against a journalist was recorded, and that is more than a double compared to the previous year. So Serbia at the moment ranks at the top of Europe in terms of risks to journalists, and I think it's important to mention because we are not a war zone. Colleagues from Ukraine should probably be in the first place, but it's Serbia. What is especially worrying for us is the rise in the number of these attacks, is the rise of physical attacks, and then the role of police in them. What we are seeing more and more is that police is going from passive, inactive witness of violence against journalists into perpetrator. And that is something that colleagues, especially those that are covering protests, are witnessing and experiencing. Colleagues said that Journalists Association and unions are buying equipment, safety equipment for journalists. Also body cams are discussed at the moment, so that just explains how bad situation is at the moment. But yeah, just one snapshot of statistics. Between March and December 2025, there were 77 incidents where police either passively observed attacks or directly used force against them. And we are speaking about those earlier mentioned masked law enforcement officers. Also, it is followed with complete impunity. Like one of my colleagues was attacked last March while covering demonstrations of the ruling party. We reported the incident. Nothing happened so far. It is still an active case, but without any follow-up from the institutions. But this is not happening in a vacuum, and that is also something that I wanted to mention. Like what we are also seeing is increase of inflammatory language, especially those used by pro-government media and state officials. In the last 6 months, monitors noted more than 800 verbal attacks that were made by senior officials, including President of the state, against critical journalists and media outlets. And the language is deliberate. It calls for traitors, foreign mercenaries, enemies of the state, and so on. Also, as I have to say, words that we heard from colleagues in the previous panels. And this basically dehumanization creates this criminalization and basically permission for violence in the street against journalists, but also in the digital space where we are seeing increased rise of violence. And because we are now talking also about like institutional and legal responses to this, I have to say that I understand this very well in the context of the fact that Serbia doesn't have regulatory body for electronic media for more year than a half, while 2 attempts to choose members of the council in the closely observed procedure by the European Union failed because as a direct consequence of the government compromising this process, because it is not in their interest at the moment to have any control over the narrative that is created. And what we are seeing, this is something new, and I very much see it as a positive sign, is that the regulator from a neighboring countries like Montenegro or like Bosnia are getting off the grid media from Serbia that are instigating hate speech, propaganda, and so on. So that is like for us very encouraging sign that basically a consequence of that is recognized. But in Serbia, I think we will wait a bit longer until this kind of language is stopped. Just as one detail, that the NGO, or let's say government-instigated non-government organization, published a list of 45 individuals, journalists, intellectuals, that was described by human rights advocates as a target list that they said they are investigating at the moment, and the founder of that very Gong organization is our Minister for European Integrations at the moment. So that is something that European Union should have in mind while talking to Serbia about our accession process. At the same time, systemic pressures are tightening. At the moment, Serbia has 33 active SLAP lawsuits. 15 of them raised last year, 5 of them against journalists. And when we talk about SLAP, I tend to calculate numbers together because we are seeing increased number of SLAPs against activists. And in these cases, it's important to mention that the state and state institutions are the biggest slappers. I'm inviting you to watch the documentary. It's not that BIRN did it, but it's really good about the slap. It's called Slapping in the Name of the People, that we released last month. You can find it on our YouTube channel of BIRN Serbia. It also has English subtitles, and I think it explains very well the nature and the consequences of slaps on the activists and journalists as well. BIRN Serbia at the moment has 5 slap lawsuits. Interestingly, 2 of them are coming from Belgrade mayor. He was named like the biggest European slapper last year, and he's asking for 100,000 euros for 2 articles that he himself admits are factually correct, but he nevertheless felt that his reputation was damaged by something that is factually correct. But what is even more dangerous is that we are seeing criminal charges against journalists as well. A judge of the Court of Appeal sued my colleagues from CRIC, another investigative outlet from Serbia, seeking not only financial damages but also prison sentences and occupational ban for journalists. So I think it's very important to keep this in mind, that this situation escalates. Also, like, I have a long list of atrocities here, not even sure if I will have time to go through all of them, but I will just try to talk about some things that are relatively new and that we are seeing. For example, when it comes to the access to information, increased retaliation against whistleblower, journalist sources, institutional insiders that dare to speak. To independent journalists, and in 2025 we've seen like a wave of people being left without the job, including 25 journalists coming from the public service, but also telecom media. Telecom is a state-owned cable operator from Serbia that has huge concentration over the cable channels, and journalists were disciplined for basically not disobeying to the orders, how to report.
Dragana, I'm going to have to, unfortunately, running out of time.
So speaking about SLAP, speaking about spyware, that is another thing, like just to mention that we have domestically developed spyware that was discovered at the end of 2024 and without any official reaction yet, so it just proves that basically all the institutions are captured. Speaking about media pluralism, one very important thing to be observed is potential government involvement in relations between Telekom Serbia and the owners of United Media. That was the case that was discovered by journalists, part of a tapped conversation between two directors that were talking about their plan to weaken N1 and Nova S TV channels, which are of critical importance for plurality of a media content in Serbia. So these are just some cases that we monitored in 2025 and that are showing how systemic grip over media is tightening. We are also now in the pretext of ENFA entering new
Dragana, I'm
process.
really sorry, we're not going to have time to have the last speaker if we don't
just
finish very quickly.
To finish my sentence, and basically, like, that process should be closely monitored. So if we are talking now about like what Europeans should do, they should definitely recognize that this process is not like genuinely a reform process, but is instigated with the attempt to further use the laws against independent and critical voices. So thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Irina Nedeva. I'm a Vice President of Association of European Journalists, the International Board, and also Special Representative on Media Freedom on the level of the board, following actually the excellent work of my colleague William Horsley from AJ UK. And I will try very briefly to present what are the systemic pressure what is the systemic pressure on public service media. First of all, have in mind that Council of Europe's platform partners decided for the last year to focus on public service media because of realizing that what is happening with the public service media is something that is a systemic part of pressure upon the media environment and media ecosystem in general. We are speaking about systemic threats after first finding common patterns in defamation laws in Europe. And why this is important? Because public service media is the exact point where every mentioned danger here, every mentioned threat actually coincides, actually intersects. And it is very well shown in the report. Actually, media capture meets financial instability and physical safety risks when a state-funded watchdog is targeted. It's a litmus test for the entire democratic ecosystem. If the framework of the public broadcaster is broken, actually the public's right to know is the first thing to fall, and we can observe all different cases, but I will start with public media management as a weapon. The most common way to silence a broadcaster today isn't through a dark room of censorship, it's through structural reforms. We see political capture when governments reshape the leadership of the public media services. In Slovakia, we saw the government dissolve the existing broadcaster to create a new entity under a model that allows direct political influence over its leadership. In Turkey, public media governance now falls directly under presidential control. In Hungary, as we heard, the public service media serve directly the ruling party's agenda. In Georgia, the public broadcaster began to promote anti-EU rhetoric, and journalists like Vasily Ivanov, Chikovani were dismissed simply for standing in solidarity with jailed colleagues. In Bulgaria, one of the country's case studies last year, actually the systemic pressure manifested itself as a prolonged leadership deadlock at Bulgarian national television, paralyzed for years by legal procedures and inability of the regulatory body to elect a new general director. What might have looked procedural has turned into paralysis, compounded by court appeals, disputes that have effectively frozen the broadcaster's leadership, governance. And when leadership is stuck in limbo, independence becomes fragile by default. Whatever it's through purges, like in Georgia, or legal stalemates, the goal is the same: to ensure that the public service media management is politically aligned. Change the structure, then install loyal leadership in the high management, and then the direct censorship becomes unnecessary. The second point will be on the financial chokehold of public media services. The report makes a very sharp point, and I will quote European Broadcasting Union, EBU: independence of public media without adequate funding is independence in name only. We are seeing this financial chokehold being used to discipline voices. In Poland, they have the lowest in Europe proposed budget for public media. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, actually the public media was pushed to the brink of collapse, and we know that just last week they briefly black out all the screens in a protest because there might be many jobs in the journalism will be lost. In Kosovo, the situation is the same. In Czech Republic, we see also proposed changes to funding and all the safeguards are weakening because if the stable license fee give away to more discretionary financing, it will be also quite bad. Even in stable democracies like Switzerland, we see plans to cut hundreds of positions following reduction in license fee revenues. In Lithuania, the parliament froze the national broadcaster budget for 3 years and debated lowering the threshold for dismissing the director, steps that may increase political leverage. And actually, when a public broadcaster has to beg for its budget every year, it creates a leash that prevents the broadcaster from investigating the very people who hold the purse. So we see everywhere how difficult the situation becomes. We should not forget the physical threats as well. Last year, the car bombing of Italian RAI investigative journalist Sigfrido Ranucci showed that the public media journalists can face direct political danger when their reporting challenges powerful interests. And I will also mention very briefly this big deterioration, how quickly a public service media could become an anti-media, in fact, because at the extreme end lies what the scholar Ayla Panievsky calls anti-media. Russia, Belarus, state broadcasters are entirely subordinated to the executive and function as propaganda instruments. And finally, there is one ultimate destination of deterioration, a public service that no longer serves the public, but instead works for dismantle the norms of democracy itself. What could be the conclusion? We have to talk about the shield, and we have to talk about the journalistic choice. Where does all this leave us? European Media Freedom Act, fully in force since 2025, offers a regulatory shield, but the question is it enforced or not? The report actually leaves us, the journalists, with the profound question about our identity. I'm speaking about journalists, the real people who do the job, not the journalism as an abstract concept, because journalists, we still believe they matter. And the broader question is, in the face of all these systemic threats, should we, the journalists, inside public media, when the public media system is under pressure, what should we do? To be simply neutral observers of democratic decline, or active guardians of accountability? And I join here the message of Irma. The system could collapse very quickly, and we have to know what are our identity, being journalists. It's not quite easy anymore to stay in this neutral position when the democracy is falling apart. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have a hard time frame deadline, if you like, which is midday, and we have to stop the event. But I think that we have lots of questions that were raised. Thank you again for the external panelists. We look forward to seeing what happens on the 12th of April in Hungary, and we look forward to seeing whether or not the European Media Freedom Act can actually be used as a tool to, or what will happen, depending on what the results are. But believe you me that the platform partners will be tracking, and will always be in solidarity with journalists on the ground in Hungary, and likewise with Serbia. I think that the EU political leadership has not been strong enough. The member states are still divided, and that sends the wrong signal. And we're looking, as we discussed in the first panel, we're looking for political leadership. I think the Council of Europe and the European Union, they already have the tools in place. They know what the standards are, the laws are there. It's about really having the courage to implement them and enforce them. I also just we're wrapping up now, I just want to give a thanks also to Jean-Paul Martos, who coordinates the annual report. His patience is endless with us. He does an incredible job of bringing this all together, and it's great to have him as a de facto member of the platform in his editorial role. And I would like to just lastly finish with what Flutura said. For people listening online, I do apologize that we don't have time to answer your questions, but we do need to wrap up. But please do take the report, use it, come to us. Let's try and address what Aidan White raised in terms of improving our outreach. Let's go and work with those people who need to hear this message. Take the report, read it, come to us with questions, think of ideas for ways that we can work with you. Thank you again to all the panelists. And we have a quick question, comment from Flutura.
It's not a question.
Very quick.
Thank you so much, Tom, for moderating the event, for standing there 2 hours, and for managing all of us. So thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Bravo,
Right.
sir.
Right, we need to go. We're going to be late.
I know. But I'd like you to get in touch because I'm relaunching the ethical journalism network here in Brussels this year.
We have to go.